Hello, it's Josh coming to you here, fresh from having shaved off my seasonal depression beard. As handy as it was to have a natural bib to catch the Boston cream that dripped out of my donuts, it was just really starting to irritate me, so off it comes. Anyways, I am here to talk about my 2023 reading year. I'll be doing something similar for my board gaming year shortly here as well. But in this video, I'll talk about the books that I read in 2023. I'll go over the number of books I read and acquired, the genres I read, the ratings I gave, the average ratings of genres, and then I'll go through my lowest rated books of the year and my highest rated books of the year. I've made videos reviewing every single one of these books, so I'll try to remember to leave links to each of those reviews in the description to this video in case any book catches your interest and you want to hear more about it. And as usual, I've divided up this video into chapters so that you can skip any of the parts that are uninteresting for you and go to the most interesting bits. All right, let's get right to it. Let's start off with the number of books read, and I will say from the outset that the number really means almost nothing to me. There's maybe one area where it does come into play, but I never set myself goals for numbers of books to read. That just adds stress to what's supposed to be a relaxing and fun hobby for me. I don't feel a particular need to be a big power reader on BookTube or whatever. So the only reason that the number might be important is because of my rapidly expanding TBR. The number of books that I have on that TBR right now numbers something like 320 something, I think, including all books in series that I'd like to read. So if I want to read even half those books in my lifetime, I'm going to have to pick up the pace a little bit, because let's talk about my reading year. It's really been the past 3 years that I've been back into reading on a more regular basis. And this came about due to life circumstances. Prior to 2021, a lot of the bedtime reading I was doing was actually board game rule books, because at that point I was still married. I had gaming friends that I would meet with regularly, and we were frequently trying out new board games. Plus, I was downloading board game rule books and reading them to see if they were board games that I wanted to try out or acquire. So my evening reading prior to 2021 consisted of a lot of board game rule books, as well as the occasional other novel or nonfiction book. I did pretty much always have a book on the go, but I just read quite slowly. Now, my marriage fell apart. I lost most of my board gaming friends, and in 2021 I found myself just with not many people to interact with on a social level, and so I started reading a lot more. So in 2021, I read 16 books. In 2022, that picked up quite a bit, and I read 22 books. And I do have a video just like this for my reading year of 2022, if you want to see the overall reading year that last year was. Now, in 2023, I only read 14 books, which is the lowest number that I've read in the 3 years that I've been getting more into regular reading. There are a couple of reasons for this lower number. One is the fact that 2023 was also a very good game. 2023 was also a very good year for board gaming, so I was getting back to reading more board game rule books. And then also in the last few months of 2023, I started to try watching some TV series and some movies just to get into something that I don't usually do, and nothing in particular ended up catching my interest, but I did spend a fair bit of time checking out various shows and movies and not doing quite as much reading. So in the end, I read barely more than one book a month last year. Now, what about the quality of books that I read? So again, comparing to previous years, 2021 wasn't a great year in terms of quality, in the fact that my average rating for the books that I read that year was only 6.1 out of 10. 2022 was a very good year. I was doing a lot more research about each book before I decided to pick it up and read it. So my average rating last year, or in the previous year, ended up being 7.5 out of 10. And then In 2023, that rating dropped a bit to an average rating of 6.86 out of 10 for the 14 books that I read in 2023. Now, the 3 worst books of the year are the books that are really responsible for dragging that rating down, because if I remove the 3 worst books of the year, my rating then becomes an 8 out of 10, which would have been a superb reading year, but just those 3 books really dragged down that rating. But on my rating scale, it's close to 7 out of 10, which is very good on my rating scale. So, it's pretty decent overall. Now, in terms of the genre breakdown, I did have a much more diverse reading year than I did in 2022. So the previous year, 2022, I read almost exclusively fantasy. I read 18 fantasy books. I read 3 works of historical fiction and 1 science fiction book, and that was it for genres in 2022. In comparison, for 2023, I read 1 literary fiction book, which I rated 3 out of 10. 1 picture book, which I rated 3 out of 10 as well. 2 dystopian novels, which I rated 6 and 7.5 out of 10 for an average of 6.75 out of 10. I read 1 graphic novel / post-apocalyptic / science fiction / horror work that I rated 7.5 out of 10. My most read genre, once again, was fantasy. It's the only genre besides dystopian where I read more than 1 book in the genre. In this case, I read 7 fantasy novels, or fully half of the books I read in 2023 were fantasy, and the average rating of those 7 books was 7.5 out of 10. Again, though, there's that 1 book at the bottom of the list that really dragged down the rating. If I could just take that 1 book off the bottom, my average fantasy rating would have been 8.4 out of 10. So once again, the average is dragged down a bit there. Next up, I read a single classic for a rating of 8 out of 10. And then the final category was 1 single nonfiction book, which I rated 8.5 out of 10. And it's kind of astonishing to me to see that in the past 2 years, in 2022 and 2023, I only read 1 nonfiction book. I had to actually go back and double check that because it just didn't seem right to me. Back before I really got into reading heavily a few years ago, my typical method was to alternate reading 1 work of fiction with 1 work of nonfiction and sort of go back and forth. But now the nonfiction genre has been pretty much all but absent as I seek the desperate escapism of fantasy fiction. Before I wrap up with the worst books and the best books of the year, let's also look at the books I acquired. So looking at 2022 first, like I said, I had read 22 books that year, and I had acquired a total of 39 books. In 2023, those numbers were a little closer. I read 14, of course, but I acquired 23 books in 2023. The reason that number dropped off a bit is purely due to financial reasons. Interest rates, costs of living, all of that nonsense meant that if I was acquiring books this year, they were either free books or purchased from thrift shops or sales or whatnot. And thanks to my Patreon supporters, I did still have a little bit of money I could spend on my hobbies. So a really big thank you to especially my higher tier supporters, Charles M, Abe O, Saver Girl, Mojo Dam, Joanna N, and my highest tier supporter, Asmondas Perfect. Thanks to you, I didn't have to entirely eliminate book purchases this year, and I was still able to pick up a few. One thing, for some reason, I don't keep track of is the number of books that I unhaul. I mean, I'm definitely acquiring more than I'm unhauling, but I'm not sure exactly what that comparison would be. I should do a video of my overall book haul of last year. I mean, just as a quick breakdown, like I said, I got 23 books. 5 of them were free from those free book boxes. And don't worry, I'm also putting books in there as I offload them. So 5 free books, 6 came from thrift shops, 4 were from the book depository closeout sale. So the online retailer book depository closed down. So I got 4 books from that sale. I picked up 2 other books from other sales, as well as 2 cheap puzzle books that were purchased new. And then again, thanks to my Patreon support, I did pick up 4 new books. 3 of them were a trilogy that was relatively cheap because all 3 books were bound into a single volume, and then there was one other novel there. So that's kind of how my acquisitions broke down. And now the worst of the year, followed by the best of the year. So having read only 14 books, I basically just split it 7 books and 7 books, the 7 lowest rated and the 7 highest rated. And the split happened at the ranking of 8 out of 10. So anything that's ranked less than 8 out of 10 went on the lowest rated books of the year. Anything rated 8 or higher went to my highest 7 books. So, I mean, it's pretty good that I have 7 books out of the 14 that I rated at least 8 out of 10. But let's start with the 7 worst, counting down from the highest rated to the lowest rated or worst book of the year. So at number 7 there, we have Heir to Sevenwaters by Juliette Marillier, which is book 4 of the 6-book Sevenwaters series. In 2022, I had read the first 3 books of the series. I had rated them an average of 8 out of 10 for all 3 books. In 2023, I read the second 3 books of the series, and although I didn't plan it this way, it just so happened that those 3 books were also rated 8 out of 10 on average. Book 4, I rated was a little bit below average. It was 7.5 out of 10. The next one I also rated 7.5 out of 10 was The Nice House on the Lake, volumes 1 and 2. So this is a graphic novel series that was bound up into 2 volumes, obviously, and I decided to rate it as one whole, being one story as it was. Volumes 1 and 2 actually comprise the first story arc, and unfortunately I don't know how long we're gonna have to wait for the story to continue, but I really enjoyed that graphic novel series. I rated it 7.5 out of 10. Next up was another 7.5 out of 10. This was The Testament by Margaret Atwood, which was the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, which is actually the next book on the countdown here. I rated The Handmaid's Tale 6 out of 10, so I actually enjoyed its sequel a little bit more than The Handmaid's Tale. Now, dropping into these bottom 3 that I said completely ruined my overall average ratings. First, we have the picture book, The Boy, the Mole, the Horse. No, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie McKessie. I can see why a lot of people loved it and found it charming and beautiful. It just wasn't my style. The next one down is another 3 out of 10. This is The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. Had a lot of problems with this novel, obviously. Rated it this lowly. But the worst of the year was actually the only reread of a book that I've done in years. I almost never reread books, and a large part of that is due to this tremendously huge TBR I have, all the books I've never read that I'm really itching to get to. As a result, I don't tend to go back and reread books, but this time, for my very first and so far only buddy read with another booktuber, hi Ellie, I decided I can't go wrong with a book that I have for years stated as one of my very favorite novels of all time. But on rereading it, I was like, how did I think that this was one of the best books ever written? Because when I reread Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis, I gave it a 2 out of 10. And I recognized so much problematic stuff in there in terms of the ideas it was attempting to espouse that were, as if you know C.S. Lewis, were very heavily influenced by Christianity and some of the just awful stuff that I'm glad to have escaped from. But leaving that behind and going to the 7 best books of the year, this time we are going to count up from the lowest rated of these 7 to my highest rated or best book of the year. We're going to start at 8 out of 10 with a book called Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, an absolutely delightful book that gave me similar vibes to another wonderful book called The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. We have a couple more 8 out of 10s here. The next one was Seer of Sevenwaters by Juliette Marillier, book 5 of that 6-book series, which hits on the average rating of the series at 8 out of 10. And then we have A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, such a delightful little novella that I read right at the end of the year, at Christmas time, obviously. Moving up to 8.5 out of 10, we have Flame of Sevenwaters by Juliette Marillier, the 6th and final book of the Sevenwaters series, one that I thought was a little bit better than the average in the series. We have another 8.5 with my one nonfiction book, A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson. Just so much fascinating history and science in that book that it was a very enjoyable read. And then my two best books of the year were both by the same author. They both fall within the same fantasy world, although each one is very much a standalone story. So first we have Paladin of Souls by Lois McMaster Bujold, which I rated 8.5 out of 10 as well. And this chronologically follows my best book of the year and straight up my #1 fantasy novel of all time, The Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold, which I rate a perfect 10 out of 10. Bujold is just such a wonderful writer. The story that she tells and the themes of kindness and peace in the midst of a violent, turbulent time just hit me in all the right spots. So I want to thank another booktuber, Zara, for recommending this particular book because it's just incredible and I had so much fun with it. And that was my reading year as a whole. How was your reading year last year? If you're willing to take the time and tell me what your #1 favorite book that you read last year was, I'd really love to hear about it. Is there anything on your radar for this year that you're super excited to get to? It'd make me so happy to hear from you if you got into the comments and let me know. And I'll see you again soon with my board game wrap-up of 2023. Cheers. What is going on here? Then you can click, and as you, and this came around, or purchase from, three of them were a trilogy.